First of all, thank you so much for having me and engaging with us, especially as Nicole said, right during the holiday season. I know that there's never a non-busy time. I feel like we always think in our minds like, oh, in a couple months, things will not be as busy and we won't have to worry about all these things. But I feel like there's never a good time. So again, I appreciate you all taking the time tonight to have me. I'm coming to you from Burlington, Vermont, so not too far away from Rhode Island. I did spend a summer living in Rhode Island with my sister a number of years ago, but live up here in Burlington, Vermont. This session today, it's entitled Engaging Parents on a Path to Progress. You'll see in a second why it's progress, capital P, ROGRESS. It's the name of our center. And we're really focused here on ensuring parents are partners in developing and implementing the IEP. We actually did a webinar earlier today that was really more targeted to school folks, but on the same topic of ensuring parents are partners in the development and implementation of the IEP, because we recognize as we come together as IEP teams, both as educators and parents and administrators, there are so many key players in that work that bring strong expertise to the table. And so how can we maximize the potential of those IEP meetings, ensuring that everyone has the knowledge and skills and to bring to the meeting, to understand what's happening in the meeting, and to have those strong collaborative conversations so that what we develop coming from that meeting will be in the best interest of the child, the student, and so on. And so I'm excited to be with you guys today. So as I mentioned, I come from the Progress Center. The Progress Center is an Office of Special Education Programs funded center, or OSEP, that's funded through the Department of Education. It is a technical assistance center that was launched right at the start of COVID, and we have a 5-year grant funding cycle. So we work with local educators and leaders to really focus on developing and implementing high quality educational programming for students with disabilities, to ensure students have access to free, appropriate public education or FAPE, and ensuring they're making progress to appropriate goals. It really came together, and some of this work and the shape of the center really grew out of some of the work of, or some of the implications from the U.S. Or the Supreme Court case for the Andrew F. decision that really was looking at how do we ensure that we're making appropriate progress in light of student circumstances. And so the work of the center is really focused around supporting the development and implementation of that high quality educational programming. You'll see that's kind of a mouthful, and just like in everything in special education terms, there's so much language and technical language and acronyms and so many different things to put into place here, but really why that term is broader than what we think of as just the IEP. We're going to focus in and talk mostly about the IEP stuff today, but it's really intended to think about the full educational program for students with disabilities, right? So both the special education programming that they're receiving, as well as their access and benefit from the general education curriculum and what that looks like in their involvement in general education and non-curricular activities and all sorts of things. The focus of the center is K transition, so it's pretty broad in all disability categories. So it's not really focused in on one area or one specific disability category or anything like that. So all of the information is quite broad. The website you can see up there is promotingprogress.org. For the center, I lead out our universal technical assistance work, which is something that you all need to know nothing about because that's more jargon from these TA centers, but it's really intended to be anything that is freely available and disseminated to the public through our website, through events and resources and trainings that anyone can access and anyone can have access to. So that's kind of the work that I lead out, and all of the tools and resources and stuff that is developed by the center that comes out public facing comes through the work of my team. We wanted to just start off this session and really talking about that FAPE concept, right, of the free, appropriate public education. A lot of times, we understand what we mean by free and what we mean by public and education, but really the appropriate part is one of the biggest challenges. And I think it's one of the pieces, as we were talking about in our webinar earlier today, that parents really bring to helping us shape in our IEP development. So really thinking about not only about being procedurally compliant compliant or meeting all of the requirements that are outlined in the IDEA, but also making sure that we are developing something that is appropriate for the child in light of their circumstances, and making sure that what we develop is individualized and personalized for that student. So that's what we're really thinking about here as we think about all of the different materials and resources, is how do we ensure that students have access to that free, appropriate public education. And I'm probably not going to be able to monitor the chat as I'm going through the slides. So anyone feel free to interrupt at any point. Nicole, please jump in at any point if you see anything come in the chat, or if there's any questions in the room, no problems there as well. And we'll have plenty of time for you guys to dig into some of the content a little bit more and reflect on that. The session and what we'll go through today is really talking about two resources. I think for everyone who's in the room, you've got access to those as printed out copies. For anyone who's online, we'll put all of those resources. I can see there's a Google Drive link already available up there for you to access those resources as well. While we say two resources, and we're really going to focus in on two resources, you will see as we go forward that there are actually many more resources in those even two resources that you can access and spend time looking at, or spend time thinking about a little bit further. We also recognize that we couldn't go over everything in this short period of time, and so we really wanted to create this session that really focuses in on some of the areas that you all identified and that folks identified in the East Greenwich Special Education Family Survey that happened last spring. So you can see, for example, here, one of the needs that was reported was that families need help really understanding and ensuring the student child's disability needs are met through the IEP or 504 plan, and sometimes that it's an unclear or difficult process. So we hopefully today will talk a little bit about some of the components and help us understand kind of and unpack the process just a little bit, at least as a starting point. We'll see some other areas that we target in based on some of the feedback from your survey as well. So we wanted to shape this a little bit again, but things to think about as you frame out kind of the experience of the IEP meeting. I know that you all are probably very familiar with this experience, but kind of what does that look like for you all before the meeting happens, during the actual meetings, and after the meetings a little bit. We'll spend more time kind of thinking about the before part, but also thinking about kind of what that looks like during and after a meeting as well. So these are examples of those two resources that I mentioned earlier that we're really going to focus in on. One is a tip sheet. It's called An Overview of the IEP, What to Know About Your Child's IEP and How It's Developed. And the other is a family meeting guide. And you can see, again, there's a section in that guide that's called Before the Meeting. There's a section in that guide called During the Meeting, and then something as well for After the Meeting. That one is a meaty one, and we'll spend some time looking through it and talking through it as well. Both of them are actually quite meaty, but to really help you kind of think through and unpack some of that, we'll only focus in on a couple different areas, but you can spend some time looking at the other sections as well. The idea of this tip sheet and meeting guide is really just intended to be some resources to both think and prime some questions, ideas, considerations to understand kind of as you're going into the meeting, kind of what's going on, what are the key components here that we need to think about. So to start out, really thinking about kind of what are those key components of the annual IEP meeting. And one of the ways to really think about that is reviewing this tip sheet. So we'll start off with that blue tip sheet that's called the IEP tip sheet for parents, an overview. You'll see if you look at this that it includes the 7 elements of the IEP that are critical for our IEP development. In addition to that, we also have a section here for the transition plan and some information about age of majority as well. Each of those key components of the IEP are things that we need to talk about and really think about as we're in the IEP meeting. So thinking about starting with our present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, our PLAF statement or our present level statement, what that looks like, and then the measurable annual goals that we develop to see student progress toward those goals, the monitoring plan, the statement of special education aids and services, the explanation of the educational setting, the participation and the assessment, the date, frequency, location, and duration of services. So you'll see on this tip sheet, each of those elements are outlined here. And in addition to that is a brief description of what each of those elements mean, and then a place where you can learn more about each of those elements. So while your agenda for your meeting itself might look a little bit different, it might combine some sections together. Sometimes we see that or things like that, but it should include focus on each of these different areas, because that helps us to conceptualize that full IEP and making sure that we have that full IEP component to put together.
Amy, 1 moment.
Amy, can you pause for a sec? Okay, it's Nicole. So I just wanted to make sure that you're seeing here that this is when you have an annual IEP, this overview is exactly what happens in the meeting. So, you're starting with present levels, this is what child's good at, this is where we see struggle. You're moving into goals. Goals lead to services and dates, frequency, times, the special services and when it's provided. The goal has also how to measure. And then there's placement discussion and transition once the child is age 14. So I just want to make sure, because Amy went through the steps, but it's a lot of the things educators know the words mean, but I don't know that parents understand that this is literally what the team is doing when they go around the table and start talking. So when you look across, it's trying to give you a little infographic. This is part 1. This should be layman's speak of what it means. And then we're going to show you, if you click here, there's more details about each one. Amy, someone in the audience was just saying, is there a point in the IEP? Because I was just explaining that the steps you shared are like what they see in a meeting.
Yep.
And so, and a parent said, is there a portion of the meeting where it's what the parent feels are the present levels, or that the parent would like something to be written in the IEP that they ask for? And I just responded that, educators may think that you can offer at any time, and that if you're quiet, you don't really have something to offer, or vice versa, maybe because parents didn't know that and that historically they didn't. Anyway, we were just talking about how you're going to go into some of that in a moment.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
And there was one more comment, and then we can keep going. Both of these tools, like the meeting guide, it says before the meeting, there are questions in here that we can both say to staff, you could ask families this in advance, and also we can say to families, send this in advance, just share it.
I can tell you from experience, it's not in an IEP, it's a 504, but from what I understand, that's still protected by law, but we're having a hard time getting an IEP for my son. We actually took weeks to write in 504, and the school just kind of pushed it to the side and said, this is what we do. So they think they're respectful. We as parents have to say no.
Well, I think I would just say earlier on in the norms of the preparation, we just said, we've got a new superintendent, we've got a brand new director, and we know that we have hurt the trust in some ways, and we are trying to rebuild. And this training is going to be shared with staff, with admin. Consider this a start to what we hope is going to be somewhat of a culture change. I mean, I will tell you, that's why I'm on school committee. I don't have a need to put in 100 extra hours a month for a second job, other than to say, I think we have room for improvement. So, but there's a lot of good people who, in all honesty, I will tell you, I'm a special educator, we didn't get trained on this. Like so if you didn't get trained in your pre-service about how to engage families, and then you don't get trained on the job and maybe even see practices that are not super strong, I think this is a start in the right direction for both people. The whole document is for you. So let's get into it, because the first thing, I think one of the first things you have to understand is, when you understand how the document is set up, you know where your comments belong, right? So so for example, if I say, I didn't feel that Cole had a program that was appropriate to my students' needs, I now know, after Amy teaches me, that belongs in the placement section. Now I know what part of the IEP I'm unhappy with, as an example, do you know what I'm saying? Or I know that I need accommodations. Oh, that belongs in that section. So I think having common language is a good starting place, right?
Yeah, so we'll talk about this all and unpack it a little bit further as we go forward, hopefully. So one other thing that we just wanted to note before we jump into the resource a little bit further is thinking about who comes to the IEP meeting. We're not talking about all of the members of the IEP team here, but wanted to pull forward this one kind of consideration and person group of people for you to think about, right? So as we're thinking about the development of the IEP for the student or your child, really thinking about who are those critical members that might not be a required member of our IEP team, but bring special knowledge, expertise regarding your child and your child's disability, and really has a clear understanding. It might be somebody who's providing additional services to your child. We had, especially as students get older and in transition planning, it might be some other folks there. It could be others that really are invited to the team because they know your child and they know your child's needs, and they can bring some knowledge and expertise to that meeting. One of the things that we do want to reinforce and think about as we're thinking about this idea of building trust and norm setting and kind of creating that space, right, is thinking about being clear and transparent ahead of time with the IEP team about who you might be bringing. That's something that can be helpful for you, and to really think about that as we go forward, because as you know, it might be as simple as making sure that the room size is big enough for the group of folks that are coming to the team meeting, but really just creating that sense of openness and transparency and that relationship building and trust. It takes time, it takes effort, right? It takes ongoing communication and collaboration. But if we can keep reinforcing that experience, hopefully it will feel better for you all in the long run. So just wanted to point this out as a reminder that you can bring additional people that have that knowledge, expertise for your child. I think this idea really gets to one of the things that someone was sharing earlier about some questions to share ahead of time, or having someone reach out with some needs or questions or things like that that might be helpful to share with the team to help the development of the IEP. And so one of the things that the Progress Center did, and these are linked on that teaming the meeting guide resource that you have. I know obviously if you have a printed out copy, you cannot click on a link, but you'll have the linked versions as well for you. So there's both a student form and a parent form. And these really just focus on some of the big areas. So thinking about kind of what are your child's main goals and priorities for this year and for the future, and really trying to start that conversation of the IEP in that orientation, right? Starting with thinking about that, thinking about some of their strengths and needs and being able to share some of that information, and then thinking about some of the areas that have worked well or haven't worked well in the past. What are some of the supports or accommodations that have been really helpful for your child, or what are some of the things that has been tried and oof, that really didn't work, that wasn't successful, or might be helpful outside of the school environment. So this could be a nice way to have that conversation, and it can be helpful to have that conversation or share that information prior to the IEP meeting, because then we can spend the time in the IEP meeting really ensuring that we've got that right? Like that we have a clear sense of the goals and priorities for the child, that we have a clear sense of their strengths and needs and things that are working and not working. That will help us drive that conversation in a way that's more efficient and effective. So this is something that's great if educators reach out to parents to help have that conversation, but it can be something as well that you can just share out with your team members as a parent to share some of these big ideas. And there might be other things that you think are important to share, and no need to share using this form itself. You can adapt it, and your district might create something or have something that you can build from as well. But it's really that kind of dialogue and conversation even before the meeting about sharing some of these big ideas, because I think it will really help. And this can start, at the first IEP meeting all the way up to every IEP meeting. So we heard a little bit about an experience of someone who had that happen later on in the secondary grades, but starting that conversation early can be really important, and starting that transition or the forward planning of kind of where do you want your child to be and where do they want to be in the future from an early age can be really important.
Amy, if you can pause for 1 second.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I messaged to Mr. Mercaccio what you had said, Anne Marie, about if maybe suggesting that staff could share this in advance just to sort of help. And also that I wanted to point out that if you think about the staff, a lot of times when you're a special educator or a related service provider, you're only with a student for a portion of their K-12 experience. So just as an example, I have a nonverbal son. ever since he was in pre-K, I was saying, I think he's never going to live independently. I think he's going to need assisted living his whole life. I want to see him be able to communicate. I want to see him be as independent as possible. And I don't care about grade level content. Okay. So that's an example of, if I didn't share that information, they might think, well, the state tells us grade level content is what matters. And I'm saying no, because as a parent, I'm not saying, I don't see him ever being in 7th grade science. Like, he's just, that wouldn't be meaningful for him, my personal view, okay? What I need is for him to see a danger sign on a bottle and not drink that. Like, that's what I need. So I just want to say that I think it's the nature of the people at the table. They're thinking about the next year. It's your job to share with them life, right? And I didn't find, other than the fact that I think it was surprising a little bit that I said it, I don't think that I got a bad response. And I think that that's it. I think it was the inclusion versus independence, because a lot of times those are two very different IEPs. If you're heavy into, I want them in gen ed all day versus I want them to move in their skills, and gen ed might not be the place for that. Some kids it's the same, some kids it's not.
So one other thing, just to think about prior to the meeting, right, is reviewing any information or documents or any questions and sending any questions in advance, right? So it might be taking a second to look at a past IEP or a current draft of the present levels. If you have drafts of parts or goals or something like that, it might not be something that your district does, but it could be, especially if you're shifting to some of this collecting pre-information to help develop a draft piece that you might reflect on and then confirm in the meeting. It's not that you would have a full IEP developed prior to the meeting, but that you're just using that confirmation piece, right? But it might also be looking at progress toward IEP goals or past evaluation reports or work samples, or what's going on for your kiddo at school currently, so that you feel prepared in that meeting to kind of refer to any of that content or share any questions that you might have if you don't understand kind of how the information is laid out or what the data means or the progress means. It might be helpful to kind of really look at that ahead of time and be ready to unpack that a little bit further. So if you look at that section of the meeting guide itself, you'll see that all of these different kind of ideas are here, right? So it's about learning who the key parts of the IEP so that you know kind of what's going on in the meeting. It's about understanding who might be attending the meeting and then sharing your child's concerns and needs and goals with the team, both yourself and maybe your child's feedback as well. It's reviewing any additional or available information. It's identifying if there's anyone else you would like to invite to the meeting, ensuring that you've told the team about that. It's letting the school know if you need any additional supports to access the meeting, and also thinking about kind of the implications of in-person or conference or video call. I think it's one of maybe our silver linings of COVID-ish that we are all better at Zoom than we ever probably were prior to the COVID experience. And so it provides us a little bit more flexibility sometimes as needed to think about that. And then just confirming that you have the copy of parental rights or your procedural safeguards. You'll see in this section, it has those kind of big things to consider. And then there's also a place to take notes. So if you, prior to the meeting, want to jot down some of the big things that you want to make sure as you're reflecting on the data or as you're looking at some of this information that you want to make sure that you're taking account for, there's a section there. If you're on the online version, it's a fillable PDF form, so you can type right into that if you would like, or you can print it out and take your notes directly in there, depending on what's most comfortable.
Amy, do you mind if we just pause for 1 second and see if anybody has questions about the pre-meeting before we transition?
Sounds great.
No, about how the vision would be for how we would like it to be run. I mean, unless you have a question for.
think this is great.
We have a parent who says, I like this vision of how the pre-meeting could be run.
No, there's no intake protocol for parents. I mean, like, I put together information packets because there is a lack of soliciting feedback about, my son, and he was new to the school at the time. No one, you go to a doctor and you have to fill out tons of intake forms. There's no currently, no intake forms or no process that I'm aware of where anyone gathers information from me about his needs or his challenges.
really good point too. You go to the doctor's office and there are so many forms you're inundated with forms that you have to fill out. You're giving information about your child so that the doctor can better serve your child.
Yes.
Help your child. So now here we are sending them to school for a majority of their day, and no one ever asks us, well, how can we make things better? Is this just your child?
Is this process different though? Like if the child, my daughter was identified before she came to preschool.
Yeah.
So
as well.
East Greenwich got up her, whatever the IEP is called before.
Right, so like a meeting street kind of thing.
It wasn't in, right, so the committee on special preschool special. So,
Early intervention.
yeah, so so when I came here, I submitted all of that when I registered her and they were able to hit the ground running. So I don't know if that's different.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I think just as an aside, like two asides, I'm a high school history teacher as separate from being a parent, obviously. And I think just to speak to, I think education in general, I think teachers particularly, or not as much special educators, but I think teachers, there's sort of a line because, you have things you want to bring up to families, but you're not sure how they're going to be received all the time, particularly in the area of disabilities with, like I'm thinking of a student I have who, and obviously I'm not, a neuropsychologist, but in my mind, with the information I've gotten from the work and just interacting with her, I would want her to get an evaluation. But when, you bring it to families, sometimes it's like, it's hard to kind of find that balance. So I think, and that's not to say everyone is good at that. Sometimes people are very much not. But I think, like you said, being proactive, I think is really the best thing, because then the educators in the meeting hopefully are going to receive that information. But to have it be more formalized, I think would be really helpful.
Yes.
Because my second part of the story was that my son wasn't identified through early intervention. We had him evaluated by a neuropsych when he was 3, and they were like, "Oh, it's anxiety," and I was like, "No, it's not." But he didn't qualify for autism until he was 6 because they didn't have the academic piece to kind of compare. But because I just knew that there was something, I just kind of pushed, and luckily he had a really good kindergarten teacher who also was like, I think, there's definitely support he needs. And it wasn't really until she approached the team at school that things kind of like finally started to happen. So it is hard when there's not sort of that early intervention piece and you're trying to sort of figure out like, what avenue do I go into? Like, where do I go to school? Where do I go to help? And I'm a teacher, I know all the jargon, and it was hard for me, so I think that speaks to the fact that it's just a really tough process in general.
So I think I tried to summarize in the chat for the folks at in the Zoom, including Mr. Mercaccio, that like, it just sounds to me like, the parents in the room feel like if any information sharing happened, it was instigated by them, and sometimes without clear guidance as to how to do it, and that it would be really helpful if we could formalize whatever that process is that happened at the high school for Anne Marie, or something that would be a little bit more district-wide that solicits the feedback. And then, just so we now have, a tool for you to think about. We're going to share this with the staff, and hopefully this will be the beginning of conversations. So could we ask Mrs. Rakovic, would you mind, I don't want to give you work to do, but if you think about it, if you could drop that link or that name to Mr. Mercaccio. I put it in the chat too, but Mrs. Rakovic was sharing that when Paula Dillon was the director. So that's, I think, 3 directors ago, if you count the substitute between Paula Dillon and Brad Wilson. That they used to use the Ziggurat model of, there was some sort of like an interview tool and they would use it every year. And that sounded a little bit like what Anne Marie had. But if you don't mind, just for the sake of time, we're going to get into during the meeting. If you're okay with that.
So if you started with that IEP tip sheet overview that we talked about with the different components, one of the things that I just wanted to point out here is really pulling forward that there are relationships between these different resources and ways to dig in a little bit deeper. So we're starting here just looking at the present levels for an example, also because they are one of, I think, the most critical parts of the IEP, right? So it's where we really set up and define the student's current performance, their needs, their strengths, and all of the information that will really drive the rest of our IEP anyway. So it's a nice place for us to start to share an example of this. And then if we can get into some deeper areas, we can do that as well. But if you're looking at your blue tip sheet there, you can see that description, right, in that row across the top. When you see that where I can learn or where can I learn more section, there are actually 2 links there. Again, if you have the printed out version, obviously you cannot link, but I will show you what that looks like in just a second. And then there's also a link underneath that really links to the IDEA regulations themselves. Over on your IEP team meeting guide, you'll see that there's during the meeting section, there are different sections of the meeting that align with those different components that we talked about. Some are coupled together a little bit just based on spacing and all of that as well. We see the measurable annual goals and monitoring plan are together there. But you can see there's a link there for the present levels of academic achievement. So if you flip to that section, there is a section there in the meeting about what things we need to consider about the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, and then a space there for notes. It includes some guiding questions, and we'll look at that in just a second. So you can see across those different resources kind of how they build on each other and relate to each other. So again, just to reorient here, we're talking about that present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. You'll see that's quite the mouthful there with the PLAF. Used to be called present level statements or present levels of performance, and lots of different acronyms are used for this part of the IEP. But this idea of both academic achievement and functional performance are really important here. In our present level statement, we include both information about where the student is performing around academic areas such as reading, writing, and math, and so on, but also functional areas. And that's across disability categories, right? It's not only for students with more significant disabilities that we're talking about functional needs. We're talking about functional areas and needs for all students, right? Both their academic needs and their functional needs in this statement. This is what is really driven and can be driven by some of that information shared in advance, right? Really helping to identify the strengths and needs for the student and looking at past data about where the student is in their current performance. So having a really good picture of in the present levels of where the child is really helps us to drive all of the other decisions we make. It helps us to understand what is most important for us to measure progress to and set goals around. It helps us to really define the services that we're going to provide and what those needs are. So this is a really critical piece here. If you click on that, can I learn more? What you would actually see if you had something that was clickable is a different tip sheet here that digs deeper into what the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance are. This was originally designed to help support educators really in outlining some of this information. But it can be helpful for you all as well if you're interested in really digging deeper on each of these different components. So that same instructional model can be applied across each of the different components. So there are tip sheets for each of the areas in the IEP. So here we have a tip sheet that really focuses in on all of the components, things that we need to know briefly about that present level statement. What are the key components of the present level statement? And then it helps us on the backside to think about some implementation considerations as well. There are guiding questions here that might be helpful, might be things to think about as we're having our conversations in our meeting. And on the IEP team meeting guide for families, there's also some questions here. So it's some things for really thinking about at this point of the meeting for you to consider and think about sharing and having conversation around is like, when we're talking about this present level statement in the meeting, does that sound like your child? Is it really reflecting all of your child's needs and relevant strengths that will be important for defining the rest of the parts of the IEP? And how is your child's progress in the previous school years reflected in that? So if we think about looking at some of that information prior to the meeting, we'll have that on hand, right? To really think about kind of, does this really sound like the progress that my child has made in the previous year? But this idea of really making sure that our PLAF statement or our present level statement is strong is so critical as we think about the rest of the sections of the IEP meeting. So that's something for us to consider. Each of the different parts of the meeting have those same kind of considerations, a description there, as well as kind of that conversation, but really making sure you guys can think about kind of stepping in here. Does this sound like your child? Does it reflect their needs and strengths? Because if we are missing key pieces of that information and it's not packaged together, it doesn't sound like your kid, then we need to take a second to step back and really make sure that we're defining that present levels and identifying those needs and strengths. Because of time, right? We're not going to go through each of the different sections here just because of time. We could spend time really unpacking goals and all of that as well, but we wanted to target in on some of the areas that you all shared were some of the more challenging and meaty kind of areas. And so we thought we would really spend some time looking at the statement of services and aids. And I know we're kind of getting toward the end of the time anyway, so wanted to just briefly kind of get us over to the statement of special education aids and services, because this is one of kind of the biggest parts, right? It has a lot of parts in it. It's most complicated, but it's really the supports and services that are being provided both for your student to make progress toward their IEP goals, as well as to access their regular education, their general education setting, the extracurricular activities, non-academic opportunities, and so on. And so it also includes supports both for educators and for you all as well can get support through the statement of special education aids and services in order to support your student or your child. So just like the other one, you'll see we start with the statement of special education aids and services in the description. We have a tip sheet series around that, and then we have a section in the meeting guide. So this is what it looks like if we zoom in here. What does that statement mean? It really means the special education and the services and the supports that are providing to your child. And there are 4 different actually subcomponents of what we mean when we talk about the statement of services and aids. So it's made up of both the special education, the related services, the supplementary aids and services, and the program modifications and supports. And again, that's a lot of jargony language there, but what it really means, if we unpack some of these ideas, is the special education is really the specially designed instruction or the individualized instruction that is provided to your child based on their needs, the unique needs that we identified in our present level statement, right? We really made sure we called out what their needs were as a result of their disability. And that's the special education part, right? So that is the specially designed instruction at no cost to you all to meet the unique needs of the child with a disability. So it's focused on their needs. It's related to the needs as a result of the disability. The related services are services and supports to help the student benefit from those special education services. So that's things like speech language pathology or audiology services. It's interpreting services, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy, and so on. There are lots of different kinds of related services that we might consider. But that's, again, really focused on helping to benefit from special education, benefit from that specially designed instruction. The supplementary aids and services are really intended as aids and services and supports provided in the regular education or general education classrooms in order to help the student have access and participate with their non-disabled peers, right? To the maximum extent appropriate. So those are accommodations, those are modifications and other direct services that help the student have in support in that regular education or general education setting. Okay, let's go through program modifications quickly, because this is really intended to assist staff in supporting the implementation of the IEP. So that's things like training. It could be considerations about environment or special equipment or things like that. But that program modifications and supports are sometimes an underutilized kind of support, but thinking about, like, is there training that are needed for staff in order to best support your child? And so that's where some of the program modifications and supports could be. So there are, as you can see kind of on the side here, different tip sheets that really unpack each of those sections of this larger statement of services and aids. All right, go ahead, Nicole.
In the survey, the 2 top areas of need, K-12 was math instruction. Families did not feel that their students were gaining critical math skills. And this is one of those moments where I think this tool could be very helpful to you because as Amy said, this section of the IEP, the statement, services and needs, is basically everything that's instructional support. But what is it that you think your child needs? Does your child need specially designed instruction, which is basically special ed, like the instruction that is not grade level? It's something more foundational that prevents your child from being able to access gen ed. So is this what they need that they don't currently have? Or are you saying, no, my child has occupational therapy needs or hearing needs or speaking needs, and that's impacting them? Well, that's called a related service, right? Or no, they're in gen ed and doing okay, but I need some accommodations like providing notes in advance or having the test read aloud. And I know that they're not doing that in the math class and I really need them to. Well, now you know that goes in this section of the IEP, and each one of these is a section of the IEP. And then finally, maybe you say, no, the IEP looks good. Staff don't know how to do it. Okay, then what you need is a program modification and support. And if you, I know it's a little blurry up here, but you have it in the handouts, it'll say, and I really think the Progress Center, kudos to you, Amy, and your colleagues, they really did a phenomenal job with making this nice and infographic and layman speak, and like the definition is nice and simple. They give nice, simple examples. And so I think that this is really helpful in helping a parent to articulate, saying my child is not doing well in math doesn't tell us what the IEP needs to do and how it needs to be implemented, if that makes sense. Because we also had, the survey also showed reading, reading was a need to literacy, but it was not as pronounced as math. It was still a big area of need. And basically there was a question of whether we have specially designed instruction in secondary at all. Like the top section, they were saying, it seems like we're doing a lot of supplementary aids and services, right? So this section right here, special ed is doing a lot of this stuff, gen ed accommodating, modifying, etc. But sometimes I'm feeling like this part is where it's falling down. So again, the purpose of the tool is to help bridge that language divide between staff and you so that you can articulate what you're looking for. And hopefully with staff, we can have the conversation using the same resources.
To orient you all, same section, right, in the IEP team meeting guide for this section. Again, some questions to consider and a section for notes. You'll see again up here, you'll see the links colors. So that's a link to that same tip sheet we were just looking at, right? So if you're online on this, you can really think about that. So this really helps you to think about kind of each of those questions that you might ask during the meeting to kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of these areas. So is training needed? Have we addressed all my child's needs? Do we, are general and special education providers collaborating to support your child? And thinking about some of those kind of prompting questions that you might dig a little bit deeper for. But we did want to provide a little bit of time for you guys to just think a little bit and reflect. I know there are some folks that are online, so for you all, it would be kind of spending a little bit of time reading and reflecting on your own. If you're in the room, just spending some time turning and talking with someone near you, or you might choose to read and reflect on your own. So we'll just take a couple minutes for you to process a little bit on this and spend a little bit of time, and then we can have some time for questions as well after this section.
I think, oh, sorry, Amy, I was going to say we're good on time. I think Mr. Mercaccio had asked for about 15 minutes or so, and if we think we just need a few minutes to wrap up, we're doing good on time now. Pat would like to know in the how of SDI. Here, yes, I mean, Rhode Island. California was a little different.
So
The method that is not effective, where would that go in the IEP? So, and I think that that's an issue I have seen pretty pervasively across Rhode Island, but it seems to be more reflective of the tools we use. It seems to be more reflective of how we house IEPs and the technology we use to do so. So like in other states, I taught in California, as the case manager, I had that child's file. It was locked, but it was locked in my room. I had their entire case review. Like I had everything. So before an IEP, it was my job to go back and look at anything that might be historical. Before I started the school year, I read files, it's definitely something I see pretty pervasively in Rhode Island that for parents, it seems like every district, and I've worked in quite a few at this point, They like house all the like long-term files like up in the district office. The staff doesn't even, they're not even given time to go do that. They don't have those records. So a lot of times the parent is bringing more records than the staff has ever even seen, which is a challenge because you're trying to build year to year. And if the IEP document doesn't have a spot to house that information, then where is it carried over year to year to year?
You know, currently where I most often see ineffective methodologies are, you know, in the notes, the meeting notes that are taken at IEP meetings or amendment meetings for IEPs. I notice this when I do a comprehensive review of someone's entire file, but I think the point is well taken. How do we quickly access that information when we don't have those central files at our fingertips at the building level? I think that's something to look at.
I was just saying, Mr. Mercaccio, that I think to a degree, we're almost limited sometimes by the tech systems that we use for the IEPs. Like if they just don't have a spot for it, or if they just don't function that way, you know, it's on us then to build a system that does that. And sometimes without conversations like this, how do we really know we need that? I mean, I definitely know that's one of the reasons why in the IEP, I do chime in, because I'm like, I've been at every therapy this kid has had for 12 years. And most of the time I was in the room with the therapist because I got to carry it out throughout the rest of the day. So I'm like, trust me when I say, I know what doesn't work. And I don't want you wasting your time. And I don't want you to be upset when I'm upset that the progress isn't made. So like, well, let's all just work together. But I would also say another thing that really is helpful to that is looping staff. I've always wondered why. I think, like, for example, Mrs. Rakovic was my son's speech provider at Frenchtown, which was great because she stayed with them all those years. But sometimes, like my other son, by the time he got to middle, we switched providers at like a juncture where I was like, why would we switch providers right now? Like, that's just not, this is a complex kiddo. Like, we're just going to hand them off. I didn't always think sometimes that those decisions were made with that long-term. To some degree, we can bridge that long-term information sharing by looping staff, by keeping the staff as consistent as possible, especially with the most vulnerable kids.
If I could add one more thing, you know, I'm thinking about these methodologies, and I think, you know, it can be dangerous too to have a list of things that don't work for kids, because I think as students evolve, sometimes the ability to reach them through various methodologies kind of evolves along with them. I think it's more critical that we write the IEPs and the specific goals around academics and other areas based on the most current availability of data from this, you know, student data, and that should be rooted in the methodologies that are currently effective for that student.
I think that's important. I think another piece, and I see on the next slide when we were going into the next need, was really around sometimes the services not being consistently provided, and I think that gets into it. Sometimes it's hard to unpack kind of whether a methodology or delivery service was ineffective, or it was maybe not implemented quite as well as it could have been, or, you know, there were some other barriers that might have impacted it. So I think in thinking and strategically as going forward, I mean, obviously we don't really want to recreate challenges, right? So if we have identified areas that have been really ineffective in the past, we don't really think that's probably a best route going forward. But I think it's important to kind of think about, you know, why might it not have worked? Was it because it didn't get implemented as it was intended to be implemented? Or was there an issue with, you know, the service that we designed and it wasn't as effective as we hoped? Or what does the data tell us? Kind of, was the student somewhat responsive, but not responsive enough? And some of that kind of piece. So it gets a little complicated, and just, again, creating a long laundry list of kind of methodologies that have been ineffective. But I think that thinking about strategically about kind of how does information get shared year over year about some things that have worked or haven't worked and something like that, I think that can be really important. And that transfer of information and summary of being able to look back, to look forward and learn from what's happened in the past.
Mr. Mercaccio, I don't know if our SR student information system works this way, but I know some districts, for the purposes of all kids, like even MTSS plans and, you know, not just IEP notes, but they have a spot in their SIS, like I know at least Aspen, at least a few districts do it, where they can put a link to a Google document that actually follows the student throughout. And then, but, you know, like to your point, there has to be some pretty clear guidelines as to how that works and what to put in there. So that's not a place to say, oh, those kids are pain in my derriere, you know, like that's a place for really important things like I found allowing the read aloud function made all the difference for this child, or, the kinds of things that are those little gold nuggets that you're like, I wouldn't
No,
want
it's interesting you say that because we now have an alert in Aspen for MTSS, and then there is a link to the Google folder that has all of the historical MTSS plans, primarily for our tier 2 and 3 kids. But that vertical articulation piece is important, and I'm not sure how we do that and preserve the confidentiality that is required, for special education. I think it's a little bit different.
Well, hopefully you can run that by Aubrey, because to me, you're not sharing the IEP. You're sharing a nugget or two. So, I mean, I'm not seeing that being, but I could be wrong. I would run it by Aubrey. That's the lawyer. With
I
Amy?
was just gonna say, kind of going back to that point, if there's a way to share it typically with the student teachers only, because I know, like, for me as a teacher, sometimes I only get one page of whatever it is, and that doesn't give me any information. I have to go to find the special education teacher, get all the information about, have that conversation about like things that have worked before. So having that particular information as a teacher is, especially in upper grades, because your child has multiple different teachers, multiple content, would be super, super helpful. So I'm glad to hear that they at least have the beginning of something through MTSS.
I know some parents have mentioned that, they prepare documents for the teachers at the start of the year because the parent-teacher updates are so sort of bizarrely scheduled, where you're like, well, I could have told you about this, quite a while ago. And there hasn't really been a standard form for just sort of information sharing with an incoming student, to the teacher. And I think, a lot of people felt that would be really helpful. So Neil, we have a question about MTSS, and maybe you could tell us, since your past couple of roles have involved MTSS, maybe how has that sort of informed the district, and just a quick thing, how we're using it.
So how are we using MTSS in the district? Is that the broader question?
So, maybe a quick what it stands for, and then, just a really quick overview on, where that lies in this ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. I mean, it's most frequently spoken about as a regular education initiative. It's usually it's primarily used for short-term gap closure at tier 2 and 3. So those are the more intensive tiers of MTSS. But I think the most important thing about MTSS to remember is that it is it's a pervasive framework that's part of everything we do in the district. So all of your students are part of MTSS in some way, shape, or form. So we talk a lot about that tier 1 level. So that's where the universal design and differentiation pieces come in, and making sure that there's, guaranteed access to the core curriculum for all students. It's how we functionally use data, at the classroom level. The way I see MTSS, the primary goal of it is to continuously make the core curriculum more and more accessible to all students, so we avoid some of the pressure on tier 2 and 3 interventions. There's a lot of choice and voice in the curriculum, and access and opportunity for students. And as far as where it fits into the continuum of supports, as I said, MTSS is for all kids. It is not unusual for a student to have an advanced MTSS plan with specific data-driven goals for intensive intervention, particularly around academics. It's not necessarily a gateway to special education, but if short bursts of intensive intervention don't close gaps for kids, we then sometimes think, is there something more going on here and underlying all this that we can't address through, this regular education initiative? But, MTSS includes things like access to the math interventionist, the reading specialist. At the advanced tiers, we do burst intervention from related service providers and even a special educator in some cases. I'd be happy to, to come to SEAC or offer, part of the MTSS plan was to offer some parent workshops around what is MTSS anyway. And it's, although I'm not in that role anymore, it is folded into the student services umbrella, and we still have a lot of active MTSS work going on in the district, and I'm very engaged in it, as are some of the other staff members that are either in the audience this evening or on the call.
So the one other piece that really came out of the survey, right, was one of the needs was around services defined in the IEP are not consistently provided, perhaps, and maybe some challenges there. And so in thinking about kind of where in the IEP that might fit, we can think about, it's partially in the design of the IEP, but it's also partially in the implementation, right? That's really where the rubber hits the road with that implementation piece, is really more on how we designed a plan that can then be provided by our educators. And some of that might be some of the things that we just talked about with the statement of special education aids and services in the program modifications and support section. Maybe there's some training and support that is needed in order to provide that or to ensure implementation. But we might also need to think about how clearly we outline and define this section around dates and frequency, location, and duration of services. So that helps us to really lay out kind of what those services, when those services will start, how often they'll be received, where those services will be provided, and how long that your child will receive those services. That's kind of the big picture in that dates, frequency, location, and duration of services. You'll have seen it. I know you guys were looking a little bit deeper at that SDI handout as well. And some of the kind of questions and considerations in there about frequency of delivery and who's doing the delivery and how we might think about that, that might come from some of that information that you're designing in that specially designed instruction component. As you're thinking about what is the services and supports that are needed from the student, that will help you to outline kind of what that looks like with dates, frequency, location, duration of services, and so on as well. And so just like the other ones, there are those tip sheet and some information about what IDEA says as well here for this section. So you'll see again that date, frequency, location, duration of services. This is an example what this tip sheet looks like, and it just outlines each of those different sections, right, with some considerations for tips for success and what that means to really break down those different components there. And so the last thing that really here that we wanted to just emphasize a couple things is that this is a lot, right? And sometimes these IEP meetings, there's a lot of things to talk about. There's a lot of information. There might be information that we need to pivot and be flexible in the meeting because we have identified a new need or area that we need to do some deeper dive on kind of how best to provide services or supports or try something out and reconvene and dig deeper at a later time. That's completely fine. We recognize there are, considerations for that, and for timelines and things like that for procedural requirements, but it's also important for us to make sure that we have that time during the meeting and take breaks if we need to or reconvene if we need to. So thinking and advocating for yourself, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you just need a little bit of a break, it might be something that you want to think about sharing. And that goes with the same idea with allowing time for processing, right? So think about and reflect on whether or not you have questions or anything is unclear before finalizing everything and making sure that you just need a little bit more time to process and take that time. And then identifying someone to follow up with after the meeting, just like we spent a lot of time talking about kind of maybe some supports and processes for before the meeting, making sure that you understand like who you might need to talk to, identifying someone or having somebody kind of step up as the person that might be a key contact. It's probably or most likely maybe someone in the case manager role, but it could be other people on the team that would be somebody that you are going to connect with afterwards to ask further questions after the meeting. And again, after the meeting, it's that ongoing engagement and connection. The meeting isn't intended as a one-time, conversation. It's really intended to be that point in time to refresh and relook at everything. But there might be needs to review and reflect and to make changes if needed, to have follow-up conversations and to have those ongoing conversations over time. And then finally, really taking some time as a team to really appreciate the work that you're doing, the hard work that you guys are bringing to the table, the work that your child has done, and celebrating their progress and their hard work and the work of the educators in the system, because it's really intended to be, a team and to build that trust and relationship and that ongoing experience. Spending that time really reflecting and recognizing the work that everyone's doing can be helpful. And then remembering again that the IEP meeting can be reconvened at any time. So if that's necessary, feel free to reach out about that as well. I think that's the end, really. There, I'm happy if there's any other questions. I can hang on for a couple more minutes as well. And then just if you guys are interested or you want to share this with others, we obviously want to keep connected and to learn from you all and your experiences. So feel free to reach out to us and to connect with us. And if there's resources or information that would be helpful for you or ways to think about this that we can help support, we're happy to partner and think through that as well.
I don't see any. Thank you, Amy.
If you go to the website, that one of the sections here under resources and tools is for families and students, and you can see kind of a lot of the resources that we were talking about, the tip sheets here, the meeting guide here. This is the parent and student forums that we were talking about, but there's also some other resources from other centers. So we had talked a little bit about kind of all of the acronyms and all of the words and challenging words there. There is a disability and special education acronyms resource that comes from the Center for Parent Information and Resources. There's resources around student-led IEPs and some other resources there as well. So all of those different resources are on this families and students page right under resources and tools, if that's kind of a one-stop shop place to look for a lot of these resources that we talked to. So thank you.
So does anyone know on the supplementary aids and services what that would be? Is that specially designed instruction? Is that modification? Is it a modification? So if it's a modification, you're saying the child can be in the gen ed setting and that we're going to modify the content, the delivery, the et cetera, different grading, different et cetera. What I hear you asking is if that's not working, and I hear you asking special education, if there's something that's different, so it's not modifying the core, or are you saying one of the two? So we had a question, can they hear me?
Yes.
We had a question from the audience, basically saying that they want to know about math curriculum that is evidence-based and, vetted for effectiveness with students with learning differences, differently abled. And that I tried to clarify, are you looking for modification of the gen ed to be more accessible, or are you looking for special education that is for math to sort of do that sort of gap part? And they said both. I think we need both. And it seems to be elusive that we get new curricula for math in gen ed. And it's said that special ed was a part of the conversation, but that then when it comes time to actually modify, it doesn't seem rubber doesn't hit the road the way it sounded theoretically, I guess would be the best way to describe that. So Neil, Amy, I don't know, obviously if Amy answers, she's going to have a more national viewpoint. And if Neil answers, it would be more specific to our district.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share what I can share at this point. I think you kind of have to frame this as around the particular student disability and all the other things that you're speaking about, because I do think, when you say, what's evidence-based and known to work with students with disabilities, a lot of the high-quality curricula that are adapted as core curricula, around the country and even in the district in East Greenwich have been proven to be effective with students with disabilities, to one extent or another. And there are a lot of included intervention, modification and accommodation pieces that come with the extended platforms and other elements of these programs. But it sounds like, if you're talking about evidence-based math programs for students with, significantly intensive needs, I think that's a different discussion altogether.
Yeah, and I would echo the same. It's challenging to kind of globally provide, there's no evidence-based program for every person and every approach. So I don't know enough about the context, but it depending on the student's needs, the programs and the practices might look different.
Yeah, could it be that the person asking the question is wondering if there is a program focused on students with more significant disabilities that's aligned to, the core offerings at the high school level and coursework? Is that more of the question?
Can I answer that, but also give Amy some context? So Amy, we really, truly, at least at the secondary level, did not have a math curriculum. It was all teacher made and or department made up until just recently. So And then with the adoption of a curriculum, which just happened in the secondary level, we used the vetting is really about the standards. It's not really about, does it move outcomes? It's really, is it aligned to the standards? So I think the concern is that even that new curriculum, what if the kids still can't, the teacher can't accommodate and modify, and the student still can't access? So that's the context. And then Mr. Marcaccio, I think she said it's both. So it's in the gen ed setting, the struggle to actually make that accommodating and or modifying a reality, right? So that's not necessarily working out quite right. And then on top of that, if there are foundational skill deficits or, core didn't work for a few years, there doesn't seem to be another option. And so, I guess the only other thing I would add is that there is a solid evidence base for what works with students with disabilities, and that is explicit, direct instruction. And that's often not how that more discovery constructivist math tends to be. I think our new curriculum will have more explicitness, but I think what Anne Marie's talking about is like, that's something else. If we need something else, what is that something else? Well, I don't know, Mr. Marcaccio, I know we paid for the math adoption. Like, I remember that in the budget that we had the high quality math curriculum for 6 through, I don't know, remember if it was just middle or middle and high. It was contemplated, but do we have?
Yeah, it's middle, high, and it was envisions up to a point, and the other program is escaping me at the moment. It should not be, but they picked something else for a couple of the more advanced courses at the high school as far as, what their evidence-based high quality curriculum was.
So 2 things. So just one parent said, actually, I guess I will have to opinion on top of that a little bit. So I'm hearing we contemplated the upper level kids as needing something different, but contemplating what does that look like for the more complex and or lower level kids has not fully been. So like, I think that we're turning a corner, we're trying to be more transparent, we're trying to build trust, but I hope that we can have a moment of, do you hear how that feels? Okay, so there's that. And then this one parent just said that their child is a really good example of that their child is 2 years behind in math, but very bright and has a college has difficulties, but is unable to keep the pace in the gen ed math offerings, but maybe in other subjects, but it's affecting graduation, like that they might not can't graduate as given. They can't keep the pace and there's no way to modify that. I mean, I don't think we're gonna solve this overnight, but.
Yeah, I would defer to Neil on this. I think it would be helpful. I know a lot of thought went into looking at different curriculum that was adopted as high quality by the state of Rhode Island. There were a lot of factors in the consideration of it. And I think when Neil was alluding to what was done differently in the high school was we did a carve out for the geometry. That there was a different program that the sense was among the educators, students that actually kind of vetted some of the materials, that there was a different curriculum that was more accessible for geometry, and that's what they went with. It may make sense, and I'll defer to Neil on this, to get Pat Dulac and some of her people in the space to really kind of walk through what that process is, what the resources are, because I do know that, and we can speak to Mr. Pedraza on this, that closing the achievement gaps and making certain that our students with special needs were front and center in the selection of that curriculum. So I can't speak to what it is, and you're right. Is your daughter going to benefit from some of this? Probably not, maybe a little bit, because it is just being implemented now. But some of the materials are going to be a little bit more standardized. Some of the beauty of what we do at East Greenwich is we do create those materials that we have, which can be helpful in some respects, but then it also becomes very challenging when students with very unique needs. It would be nice to have some foundation pieces that are already in place that have been vetted by other school districts, used nationally, that you feel as though this is strong research base that may support your student, and that's really the way. So I can't speak intelligently specifically to the math, but I think it might be worth a further conversation.
So this is definitely it's 8:06, so I just want to be respectful of people's time, but I just want to say for you, Dr. Page, that after I did not, as a school committee member, I did not vote to approve the course of study last year at the high school, specifically because of math. There was tracking. I didn't have an answer to what special needs programming looked like. I was not comfortable with what I was hearing. And I did have a follow-up meeting with Superintendent Meyer. I think Mr. Pedraza, I might be mistaken. Yes, Mr. Pedraza, Mrs. Meyer, and Pat Dulac. And I talked about the need for explicit instruction, and I talked about, I don't really know that I got anywhere, but maybe I did. What I'm hearing is maybe we want to hear more about the new adoption. Is that something we want to ask about in the future? Now, K-5 already does envisions. And they're part of the audit because our math outcomes are not great. So anyway, I think we could put that up as a possible conversation topic in the future and ask Mrs. Dulac to come and, I don't know, or.
Yeah, and I do think, Nicole and company, there's a much larger picture discussion here, and a lot of it involves MTSS and what's accessible with regard to, interventions in mathematics at all along the K-12 continuum. And I think it all folds into the specially designed instruction pieces and everything else that go along with mathematics.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger conversation. So I just wanted to point out, I told Amy to go because it's late. Thank you. She said, thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to walk through those resources. Would love any feedback. So they really truly have trouble getting parent feedback on their resources. So, and staff's here too. So that would be, really great to have both intersections.